Everyone, welcome to the Amplitude of Tech podcast. I'm Shawn, Chief Marketing Officer of Amplix. Today we had Brian Zimmer. He's the field CISO from CyberMaxx. Had a great conversation about identity as the new edge, as well as human-centered design and security. I think we covered some really interesting topics on this one. Hope you enjoy it. All right, Brian Zimmer, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. Well, I say that for now. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm happy to have you here, except that you're a Penguins fan and I'm a Flyers fan. And the hockey playoffs are about to go as we're recording this. So We'll see if we're still friends in the next couple of weeks.
Peace in our time.
So why don't you just take a few seconds here and tell everyone who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Yeah, I've prepared a 85 slide deck to cover my my background. So it's going to be very exciting. So I'm Brian Zimmer. I'm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Place is terrible. Tell your friends. Nobody moved down here anymore. We're good. I'm the field CISO at a modern managed detection and response company called CyberMaxx. I was North American CTO for a competitor that I won't mention before that, and ran global pre-sales at E+ Security before that, and done a lot of stuff in my career, but solely cybersecurity. It's the only thing I've ever done in my career. Not saying I've done it well. I'm just saying I've done
it. You've seen quite an evolution over your career in cybersecurity. Why don't we just zoom out for a second before we get into the good stuff here, and just, what has the journey been like?
What has the journey been like? It's okay. So it's been interesting. That's a lame thing to say. What I feel is I get to the 15th hole of a whole career. It's kept me young. It's kept me involved. It's kept me learning. It's kept me around younger people who are experimenting and have open minds and new ideas. And I'm really grateful for that. And I'm also grateful for, frankly, the evolution and the change, as well as the gravity of this space. I've been very fortunate. And one of the best pieces of advice that I ignored when I was at Bank of America, I had a guy who was in the unified communication space route switch tell me that I was too focused on security and that I needed to broaden my horizons. And I'm glad I didn't take that advice.
Yeah, you don't always want to take advice. You have to make sure you consider the source. But yeah. I do wonder, I come from the telecom side, so I could be forgiven, hopefully, if I'm a little bit off on this. But when I started in this industry almost 30 years ago, security was not something talked about a whole lot.
That's exactly right.
And so I feel like today, what's different is everything needs to be looked at through the lens of security. So, what has driven that paradigm shift?
I will validate what you said, first of all. Part of the reason that you're right is that we have gotten better. We as security practitioners, because I will tell you, mea culpa, a lot of us were not good at our jobs, myself included. In fact, I was particularly terrible at conveying risk, conveying priorities, understanding, being sympathetic and empathetic to lines of business, right? If you're running a contact center and Zimmer comes in and tells you, stop the presses, you have to do all those things. Well, that's not very healthy. And I think what we as security practitioners have done, especially in the last 10 years, is really understand the business and understand where we fit in the business's journey and outcome and goals. We are now in the boardrooms and we are doing a decent job in that boardroom, whereas 10 to 15 years ago, we were not, especially 20 years ago. So we've upped our game to speak business, not security. And I went off on that tangent so long, I forgot the core of your question. Refresh my memory.
Yeah, I'm just, I was wondering how the paradigm has shifted from security not getting much love to security being, really a critical piece.
Right. So along those lines, the one thing that we've done is we've started speaking in outcomes. We've started speaking in business continuity. We've started speaking in risk minimization. And these are things that I'm not an expert in. You want to talk expertise and risk? Talk to my friend Jack Freund. He'll get you squared away. I will not. And the other thing, and Sunil Yu talks about this, and I'm very fortunate to be at an event with Sunil in a month or so, or maybe less. He talks about us being in the age of recovery. And what he means by that is, products and services and defensive strategies are all built around stopping and sometimes even containing. But we know from experience that something will slip past us and we will have to recover. And so, what we've gotten better at over the last 5 years or so is thinking about what recovery looks like, minimizing business impact, getting business operations restored quickly.
Yeah. So if I think back to what it was like back then, the enterprise was a little bit like a castle in that it was small and within the walls of the actual building that the people were working in for the most part. And so it was easy to defend the same way that a castle is easy to defend. You
Yeah.
could have high walls, you could build a moat, you could do all the things to keep people out. And the surface area was a lot smaller because it was just these four walls or however many locations you had, right? And then, I really didn't pay much attention to the evolution until really COVID happened. And at that time, people got pushed from the office and outside of those
Yeah.
walls to their homes, and they had multiple devices that were then connecting to the corporate network. And of course, this didn't happen overnight, right? It grew exponentially overnight because of the pandemic. But I had worked from home before then, and I had a laptop, and there was security anyway, so I understand that. But moral of the story is it accelerated so much, and the surface area of the average enterprise expanded, really multiplied by the number of employees they had and probably 2 to 3 devices for each employee. And then you have things
Mm.
like IoT starting to gain some momentum in the enterprise. So that perimeter has become a lot bigger. The surface area is a lot larger and
Mhm.
it's a lot harder to defend. So is there a more modern paradigm that businesses should be operating under?
Yeah, I think the premise is exactly right. There's no but. We all lived it. We all experienced it. It wasn't really all that fun. I think that's why we see the rise of SASE, so secure access service edge technologies. I think that brings us to one of the main themes of what we wanted to talk about, which is identity. I think when we when that architecture when that operations changed, that was sloppy conjugation of verbs and nouns there, but I think everybody knows where I'm going. I think that put the emphasis on the user's identity, the user's authentication and authorization. It put a premium on securing all of those devices that you're talking about, the user's endpoint, their Mac, their PC, their mobile phone, even their in-home infrastructure. So I think that is the big we were going that way anyway, but I think COVID was the one thing that just pushed us right over the edge
So
for
speaking of
for
edge,
better or for worse, right? Because I talked to somebody yesterday and they said, thank God COVID got my organization comfortable with remote work. So I don't know. There's there's good and bad out of it, right?
yeah, it's hard to see where things would have went without that. It certainly accelerated, but I think it was going that way anyway. I mean, you always
I
had
agree.
some portion of your workforce that was on the road, right? Typically, salespeople are out and about in their local territories, and then you had executives and people that might have been trainers, traveling throughout the
Yeah.
country, and those people always need to be online. But like I said, I was working from home. I mean, probably a decade before COVID happened, right? So people were doing it, and I
Yeah.
think it was starting to increase. Businesses were seeing the benefits of letting employees at least have some flexibility, if not completely work from home.
Yeah.
But this definitely, set the world on fire and sped up that process. And as far as I know, that the jury is still out as to whether or not this is a good thing for productivity for businesses. You
Yeah.
periodically hear a study come and say that people are more productive, and then you see a conflicting study the next week, right? So I don't know really where we stand there, but that's the reality of where we are. Is it's a ratchet effect, right? It pushed us into this position, and it's really really hard to go back. And you saw a lot of CEOs driving a back to office mandate and then kind of
Hmm.
back from that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's our new reality. And when we did a planning call here, I liked what you said. You said identity is the new edge. So unpack that for me.
I think the premise here is that our identity, whether it be our, mainly our user persona, is the one thing that attackers want. And so what goes into that persona? That's your logon credentials, your email, your password, your one-time password, your multi-factor authentication. We've seen that intercepted in a couple of attacks. Once an attacker has that, they can do they can be profitable. Let's speak that way. They can be profitable. The other thing, since we're all business people here, when you look at these attacks on the identity, they are low cost. They're low cost, high reward. So if you are out there researching remote code execution, or God forbid, you're having to buy what we call a 0-day exploit, that those costs are astronomical compared to the low cost of user ID, password, etc. In conclusion, there are very few things that are cheaper and more effective than the user credentials and the user persona.
And this is a lot easier to scale now because of AI. So that's got to be compounding the problem, right?
Yes, I would say so, yes. And to paint the full picture, one of the use cases or one of the plays that AI can make for an attacker is it can scour forums and boards, and we'll just say places where those things are held or stored or sold or brokered, etc. We use your verb. It can then quickly adapt to and implement passwords or credential stuffing, etc. So it raises the game because it takes something that is already low cost. Now it adds speed, and the it in the sentence is AI. So I've got something that is low cost. Now I have AI, which is um, allowing me to attack an organization and get results quicker than I could 18 months ago. And that's where we as defenders, in my opinion, need to really level our game up.
Yeah. And it allows them to shoot more shots, to borrow from the hockey conversation earlier, at the same cost.
Yes, yes, yeah. Yeah, shots on net, shots on goal, shots. Like, take a shot, put something on net. Let's see what happens. Let's see. And here's the thing. Here's the way I like to talk to business leaders and my peers. It's really about cost. Are you imposing cost on an attacker? Are you making them burn through time? Are you making them burn through money? Are you making them burn through opportunity? Are you making them burn through stealth? Are you causing them to be noisy? What we want to do is impose cost on the attackers, and we do that through a variety of controls. But I will get off on a tangent, so I'll stop talking there.
No, I think that's a good tangent because I don't often think about it in those terms. I think about it as blocking shots, but that makes sense. If you just become a less desirable target or a less cost effective or a target that is not as profitable, then they're likely to move on to the next one. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in essence, I think the other way I like to speak is time, especially with the swift implementation of AI as an attacker's tool. We're seeing the time to take on what we call action on objectives highly compressed. It's highly compressed.
Mhm.
So what we want to do is impose time costs. And what that time does, it allows us as defenders, and again, I work for a managed detection and response firm, it allows us the time that we need to see, evaluate, eradicate, all around respond, and then evict that threat actor. We need that time. We need that noise from that attacker. because if they move fast and they move quietly, then we can't see them. They're operating in our infrastructure. They're moving to action on objectives, which is the last stage of their attack.
So I'm going to keep talking in hockey analogy, but how does
Fine
AI
by me.
how does AI now help you, go where the puck is going to be rather than where the puck is?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things in no particular order. It also gives us speed.
Mm.
It gives us speed. It allows us to have a level one analyst in an agentic workflow, constantly looking, constantly running. And for smaller organizations, that matters a lot. And that really helps them level up. The next thing is it reduces these esoteric, high learning curve, barrier to entry situations. Meaning, I'm going to get a SOC analyst on day one, and he's going to use AI. Now, do we want a SOC analyst that knows what he or she is doing? Absolutely. Do we want them trained? Absolutely. All that. But here's one of the other advantages. I can, as a SOC analyst, as a level one SOC analyst, speak in plain English to my prompt. So if I have Claude Code, I'm in the system. Hey, query Splunk, query S1, query Microsoft Defender, query Sentinel. Now, take into account, here's the third thing, I think that's what number I'm on. Let's take into account enrichments. So where am I vulnerable? I'll give you an example that's sort of thematically related. Take a look at this credential involved in this suspicious behavior. Now, query all of my intelligence, including in open source intelligence. Is this user in a password breach? Is he or she on? Have I been pwned? Have her credentials been compromised? Let's use that as an enrichment. With that information, I can move much quicker than I could even 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So those are three just quick elements. Forget about orchestration, forget about automation, which we had SOAR tools going back a decade. Where we are now with AI underpinning and driving a lot of our SOAR capabilities is far advanced from where we were way back then.
Yeah, it's incredible how quickly things are moving. And I want to go back to the user issue because we're talking about identity and we're talking about it in terms of users, and this is where AI is going to come back up into the conversation. But a user is not just a human, right? Or identity, at least, is not just a human. We've got identity of machines and devices, and we've got browsers, and now we've got AI agents. So talk to me a little bit about how that adds a little complexity to the issue of authentication.
Yeah, it always has been a complex environment and an environment that is shifting, but now again, it's just faster, broader. What I mean by broader is if you're of a certain age, you could remember service accounts or daemons that would run as the machine, cron jobs, etc. We are well past that era. These non-machine identities, APIs, secret keys, they are everywhere. And we still, as an industry, struggle with the basics like managing a CMDB. What are my assets? Who owns them? What's the IP? Then we struggle with managing vulnerabilities. How in the world are we going to effectively manage these machine identities? The secrets management, APIs, etc., is at the forefront of a strong identity governance program. And a lot of organizations continue to struggle. And this is not me with a judgmental tone. Like I said, the attack surface, the situation is broad. And getting a smaller regional hospital in Nebraska or Oklahoma, just, picking places to successfully manage that in the face of attackers, that's a tall task.
How do they do it? How do you set up proper governance, and what is the risk of bad governance?
Well, let's talk about good governance. Good governance names them. First of all, good governance exists. And a lot of organizations simply don't do data governance and they don't do identity governance. And data governance is a topic for another time. probably. But identity governance in a lot of organizations doesn't exist. It's the what, the why, the who, the policies, the standards, that framework, that reporting, the driving of separation of duties, privilege management, auditability. I mentioned reporting, but also data visualization. So that's the what it is. And in just mentioning that, you can see why organizations would struggle to do that, because they're going from one problem to another, and building that, it's a big task. Now, there are platforms like Okta. I don't work for Okta. I'm not partnered with Okta. Okta is one. I've implemented Okta in the past. It was wildly successful. But you still need to have the policies, the procedures, and the oversight to set up that good governance. So I'll pause there and then let you steer me appropriately.
Well, let's take a second and talk about what Okta is. I know it at a high level, but it's basically an identity management single sign-on
Yeah.
platform, right? I'm sure I'm oversimplifying that by miles and miles, right? But what else can you tell the audience about that or similar type of platforms and the role that it plays?
I will, since you did a good job of setting it up and explaining it high level, I'll tackle what its role is, because its role is so important compared to, and it's a huge step in where we are now compared to years ago. In essence, what it allows you to do is have one one identity that logs into your ERP, one identity, one password that logs into your Outlook or your Google Mail. It simplifies the experience for the user, so that the user is not writing down passwords, writing down user accounts in a spreadsheet. That's what we don't want. The other thing that it does, it relieves the burden on the organization and allows the user to self-help. So do a password reset, manage their credentials, manage their entitlements. They can open up a request that says, hey, I don't have access to system Y. Please grant that to me. And it can be a whole lot faster. When you reduce that friction as a security person, my position is you make a user a lot happier, and you prevent them from having to write down their passwords, write down their usernames, write down all of their keys and it allows us to have one thing in one place that greases the skid, so to speak, for a better user experience. But better doesn't mean less secure. That's what I love about these, like Entra, for example, from Microsoft. It allows us to make a much easier user experience, but a much more secure user experience.
How is it different from something like LastPass, or is it?
So this is a different topic, and one that I'm really excited about. LastPass, one password. I use another one. Beekeeper is what I've seen organizations use. Dashlane. These password managers are fantastic. They allow something very similar for you to have a secure vault, which is protected by a longer, let's say, passphrase, usually a key or some stronger identificate or authentication and authorization. And it allows you to, again, remember one as opposed to multiple, writing them down, storing them someplace insecurely. It also allows you to have that ability to do it everywhere. So they are related, but I would say they're complementary technologies. So you could use Beekeeper with your identity management, your single sign-on platform, and they should be integrated.
So here's the multi-billion dollar question, but like, when are we going to have some sort of centralized blockchain driven identity that allows me to just log in because it knows it's me?
I think we're getting dangerously close. We're getting dangerously close to two things. Number one, that user experience, that technology, but we're also getting dangerously close to outside of my area of expertise. So it's two things. But I think with a lot of the protocols that exist, WebAuthn, for example, we have secure keys now. So I think we're getting dangerously close. And not to be overly positive, but we are a lot further along and a lot more secure in this realm than we were a couple years ago. I think organizations have made a lot of strides. I think most organizations have now implemented across the board one-time passwords, two-factor authentication, multi-factor, sometimes YubiKeys, et cetera, card authentication like they do in the military. So we're a lot further along than we were years ago, and for the better.
We are and we aren't, right? It's still such a fractured and siloed experience. And I'm going to rant
Mm,
for a second, so just indulge me. But just this week, right? I was locked out of Outlook and Teams for 12 hours. And it was because something happened on the back end and it logged me out and forced me to re-register the machine. And then
mhm.
when I started going through the process that Microsoft was prompting me through, it just kept taking me to a dead end. And it was this circular process of this, that, and then dead end, and then X out, and then it pops up again, and then I have to do that again. And this went on and on and on. And then eventually the pop-up window itself wouldn't load and it just was spinning. And so then I had to restart the computer because that's always what you do. And then finally I got it worked out. But also just this morning I was logging into a portal and it requires the two-factor authentication. And then it also wants, so it wants my password first. Well, I have a pass key set up, but is it the Apple pass key where sometimes it pops up on my iPhone and I have to
Yeah.
validate it or authenticate it on my iPhone, or is it the Google Chrome passkey? I don't even know. And so, but the password that popped up was wrong. So I had to figure out where that was going. And then I had to change the password in there. And then I had to get logged in. Then I had to do the two factor. This one goes to my email. Sometimes they go to my text messages. Sometimes I can't get in at all and I got to call customer service. So, moral of this story and what I'm trying to get at here is there's a lot of friction because of security. And I understand how necessary it is,
Yeah.
but what is the cost of all of this friction to the economy in general, to enterprises specifically as they, create barriers to bad guys getting in, but also to their employees getting in as
Right.
well? And is there room, or at least is there a movement, hopefully coming, of human-centered design in security?
Man, I love the setup. I love the rant. I think we can all agree with it. I think we've all been there. I think it highlights a couple of things. Number one, it just accentuates this topic of friction, ease of use. If you, okay, I'm a security guy. If I impose friction, I have to understand what the results of that friction are. And from an engineering perspective, have we created a desire line? Desire line is you'll see a sidewalk and then you'll see a path. So for those of you that don't know, that's a desire line. A desire line is what the user of the system has decided is the place to go, is the path. You designed it one way, the user has said, I'm going to use it a different way. I think we are getting better at on identifying desire lines. I think we are getting better at understanding user behavior. And I think this goes back to exactly what I said at the beginning. I think we're getting better at listening in the boardroom, conveying these concepts in the boardroom, and building solutions that minimize friction to our users, but maximize friction to the attackers. Are we there yet? No. Will we ever be there? No. I don't know. But I know we're a hell of a lot farther along than we were. And I think, it's what do you do when you're in a hole? You stop digging. I think we've stopped digging. I really do. I think we are much more attuned, much more attentive to the risks, as well as the operational friction we put on our admins and our users, and especially in the identity space.
Yeah, in marketing, we talk about user experience and user interface design, and they go together, right? So mentioned it a few times on this podcast, but I don't think I've ever really got into what it is. What it is using data about users and their behaviors and doing stakeholder interviews to understand,
Mm,
intent and designing an information architecture and then a user journey that gives the user affordances to find what it is that they're looking for in an intuitive way and lead them down a path that allows them to achieve their goal, but also achieve the goal that we as the enterprise designing the website have for them, right? So
Yeah.
it's all about using design and design cues to leave a breadcrumb trail to get people to do what you want them to do. And hopefully what you want them to do is also correlated with what they want to do. And so then everybody's happy, right? That's good
Yeah.
user experience design. And then when you design those paths, you have to then create the interface to match those paths and give them those affordances so that they can find their way around. So it's very well established that you can influence behavior with design. We see it in CX now, where people are intentionally designing customer experiences or patient experiences in healthcare, where they're giving them a path or a journey to accomplish what they need to accomplish, but also accomplish what the enterprise wants them to accomplish and have a
Mhm.
good experience while doing it. And so what I'm trying to get at with this is people are an enterprise's biggest risk because we have cognitive biases, because we get fatigued of doing things that we have to do that are overly complex, because we're always seeking out shortcuts. It's just how our brains work. We just evolved to be that way, and you can't fight human nature. So if you want better compliance, I feel like the best thing that you can do, and I mean security compliance, is to reduce that friction.
Yeah.
And that will ultimately lead to them doing what you need them to do in order to be safe and secure, but also increase or at least reduce the impact to productivity.
Here, here. And let's turn over some new ground. There's another user community that we haven't tackled, and that's the admin community and the developer community. So we talked about our end users. Your scenario applies to them, but your scenario also applies to admins, developers, etc. And if we're going to, again, stay thematically congruent, that's my SAT phrase for the day. My mom would be very proud of me, apparently. Big polysyllabic words. So privileged access management, privileged identity management, secrets management. I think it's another area where we have identified a high risk with the user, the admin, and we've introduced attacker friction, and we've tried to minimize the friction for that user. So we're automatically updating secrets. We are scanning our infrastructure for them. We're rotating keys. We are providing temporary root access, temporary admin access, or maybe even a step down as appropriate for those users being admins, developers, etc. So that's another completely different user base where the identity is the edge, because what better person, if you're an attacker, to go after than a developer who has access to important keys? What better person to go after than an admin? What better person to go after than an admin who left the organization 8 months ago and you didn't disable his or her access and she still has it up and running? And I can't remember what attack used that. And I don't know if it was Snowflake, and maybe the Snowflake compromise used an older user account. But those scenarios are not hypothetical. Those are happening in the here and the now.
Yeah, I guess the challenge with all this is being intentional, right? And if you're a lean IT team that's got a lot of things that they have to cover, are you ever going to really be able to step back and say, hey, let's reimagine the security experience that
Yeah.
our users, because I feel like I've certainly never sat on the other side of this conversation as a CISO, right? But I feel like what happens is there's you end up with an ad hoc defense posture. It's
Yeah.
we need to do this. Okay, now we need to go do this. And now we need to go do this. And oh, this thing's not working with this thing. And so when can you actually sit back and say, let's look at this holistically and let's intentionally design how our users and the outside world are going to interact with our network and our digital properties.
That's a tough one. So the boilerplate answers are when the project begins, when the new CISO comes in, when there is some sort of event that drives the ability for the organization to take a breath and to do that. I think the other major event is probably the adoption or recertification of and vis-a-vis a framework like ISO, like the CIS top 18 controls. I think you have to look for those events in order to spot the right time to do that. But that is a tough question. And the CISO's role and the CIO's role, because remember, we're talking about identity governance and data governance, although we said we were going to put that aside, which have security elements, but they are not security per se. So it's a CIO, CISO activity. And it is a fight worth having, but from the cheap seats, we need to be careful about saying, well, they should have just done it. Well, they're doing other things, right? So I think it's spotting the right time. And I think I listed 4 potentially right times to re-have that conversation. And I think those are.
Yeah, it seems like at least what you could be doing is as you're making decisions on new technologies that need to be implemented or new vendors that you need to bring in, thinking about that experience and how it's going to work with the other security measures that you have in place that are user facing and impact them or end user facing.
Yeah.
Let's run it all the way back for a second because I want to get back to talking about AI agents and their identities. Okay. So, a question that I've asked a few times on this podcast, and I feel like it's yet to be answered head on that I want to pose to you is, are we approaching a time where businesses need to start thinking about HR for AI agents? And what I mean by that is an AI agent is, for all intents and purposes, an employee, right?
Mhm.
Upsides to it where you don't have to pay them and you don't have to manage vacation and you don't have to deal with their medical issues and whatever. But what you do have to deal with still is their role, their org chart, where they kind of fit in the organization, who
Yeah.
owns them, who's accountable for them, what data and applications do they have access to, who's onboarding them and how do you onboard them, who's
Yep.
training them and how do you continue to train them, how do you manage and govern them, and what about conflict resolution? Because one AI agent could certainly be conflicting with another AI agent, and so who wins? So that's why I'm calling it HR for AI, not to be confused with AI for HR. What are your thoughts on this? Like, how do you go about approaching these, looking at it through the lens of identity management?
Well, first of all, I think you're right. I think the premise is right. I think the premise is sound. I think there's probably a handful of people. Well, let me say many more people that are more qualified than me. Here's what I would say. AI governance in and of itself, just like data governance, identity governance, corporate governance, has to be something that as a CIO and definitely a CISO, you did yesterday. When's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time to plant a tree? Right now. So begin that task. I think there are other really, really crucial overlaps that you highlighted. Number one, identity governance, the identity governance pursuant to an AI identity is a thing, and it should be governed under your AI governance policy or your corporate governance. That is a task that must be done. Data governance is what does AI crave? It craves data. That's how it drives its decision making. So the data governance is really important. I can say parenthetically, I did data protection and privacy at E Plus for a couple of years. Organizations are woefully unprepared for AI because they are woefully unprepared, and they were a decade ago, for data governance. So now we've got AI governance, corporate governance, identity governance, data governance. All of those things are woven together in a Venn diagram. I agree with you that conflict resolution is really relevant. I agree. It is a thing. An agent or a user's usage of a model. There's 2 separate things. They could be in opposition. How do we sort it out? How do we resolve that conflict? I agree with you. I don't have a hard and fast answer, but I think it is an HR issue in some respects, or a quasi HR issue, right? We're not going to get somebody from HR to feel a complaint that someone's model did X or agent did XYZ. But we are going to have this quasi resolution or HR resolution. There was another thing that I will throw two shout outs that are really important. Number one, Daniel Niesler has been doing a ton of work on this topic. I would recommend viewers, listeners, go check out Daniel's work. More immediately, Dan Guido presented, this was a couple weeks ago, I think, on how his company, Trail of Bits, they do phenomenal work. He has been such a positive influence and leader in this industry for 2 decades now. Go watch his talk. He shows how they took Trail of Bits to being really an AI first organization and what their methodology was. Highly recommend it. You probably get more out of listening to Dan than you ever would listening to me. I can guarantee that. So those are my 2 action items for the viewers and the listener.
Got it. We'll put it in the show notes. We've never had show notes before, but now it seems like we need them. So we'll put them in there.
You're welcome, everybody.
That's what all the podcast hosts say is it'll be in the show notes.
So, it'll be in the show notes.
I don't even know what that means yet, but we're figure it out. So yeah, like, it seems like I'm calling it HR for AI, and it does seem like it needs to fit into HR in some way, at least from an org chart and responsibility and like role perspective, right? Because when you're looking at the organization, you need to understand who rolls to what, and that's for decision making and that's for accountability. And so these agents ultimately are going to, there's a risk of them making huge mistakes, and so you need to know there's got to be an audit trail back to who is running the show for each one of these agents and who's using them and what are they using them for and what are they using them the way they're supposed to be, right?
But they, and this is where we might actually delightfully come across a slight disagreement. Humans make mistakes, and they make them at a much greater rate and a much greater pace, and sometimes with as big consequences or bigger. I shut down an entire time zone at Bank of America because I made a group policy push. You're welcome. Thanks, everybody. So I think we need to be, and Dan actually gets into this in his talk, about our tolerance for mistakes and our tolerance as we grow and we foster this symbiotic relationship between our AI tooling and us as carbon-based life forms and our knowledge, skills, and abilities. The thing that Dan does in his talk that's so great is he talks about how you're taking a user and you're enhancing that user. You're enhancing it for the betterment of the company, the betterment of the customer, and the betterment of that user and that user's role. And let's hover over that for a second, because the user and the company are not the same thing. They're able to take skill sets in Claude or in Anthropic and share them. They're able to take functions and share them across the organization. The other place where I would maybe slightly disagree with you, you're talking in HR for AI. So I think that function has to exist in AI governance. I don't think it's HR proper. Sure. And I don't mean to say that that's your argument, but I think it goes back to governance. And here's another example. Organizations have forever struggled with DLP, data loss prevention. Data loss prevention is part and parcel to a strong data governance program. Do we want people exfilling data? Do we want them misusing it? Are we going to allow them to make mistakes? What guardrails are we going to put in place? Well, that also applies to AI. It's almost a one-to-one replacement in maybe not replacement, but there is correlation between what we would do in a strong data governance, strong DLP program, and strong AI governance, and the guardrails that we would put on it in an organization.
So a few responses. Number one is we don't allow disagreement with me on this podcast. So
you're firm and fair.
But the second thing is, I certainly wasn't saying HR owns the agents, right? But I do think that the agents would probably be reflected in HR, just in the sense that if one of my employees is doing something and someone has to question it, or there's an accountability issue there, they're going to come to me. Are they going to go to IT? Like, I know
Yep.
IT is ultimately owning all these agents, right? But I guess it also depends on how these agents are deployed. And I don't know how enterprises, how much autonomy people are having in enterprises.
Yeah.
Like right now, I know there's a shadow AI problem, right? Like, I could
Yep.
have an agent running right now that nobody in my business knows about. In the future, maybe it's on the map, but maybe I'm still able to create agents within a certain box that I've been
Yeah.
allowed to do, right? So I don't know. I guess I'm just saying, like, from a mapping perspective, there needs to be some visibility in the organization, not
Yep.
just in the IT department, for who rolls to, or what rolls to who, I guess
Yeah.
is a different way to
I
say it.
I agree with you 100%. And I think the more we flesh this out, think about what the ultimate goal of a DLP program is. A DLP says this user or this user persona or this profile or this system account, whatever it is, did this to this data element at this time. This is the action that we took. We blocked it. We quarantined it. We allowed it, but notified. What we need to wrap our heads around is the governance, which is lacking. You nailed it. We have a huge shadow problem, but we had shadow cloud, right? We had shadow IT. We're used to this. We know how to do this. Our muscle memory is there. What's what needs to be built, in my estimation, is the response action. And again, I see to a man with a hammer, everything is a nail. I see things coming from a monitoring and response perspective where I want to know what that user, what that agent did to that data at what time, what
Mhm.
response action do I take? This is why I come back to agreeing with you that does look like an HR motion. User, you may not take protected information and drop it in your instance of OpenAI. We have purchased Claude for that reason and wrapped guardrails around it. I
Right.
noticed you did it. I stopped it. I have intervened with a strong talking to. That's the HR motion that you're talking about. And that element, you are 100% correct.
Yeah, I don't think Melanie from HR, and this is now her second shout out on this podcast, which is odd, but Melanie from HR is not going to be spinning up agents and training them and onboarding them. Like, I get that, but
Yeah.
yes, as it pertains to how humans in the business are interacting with them and who's accountable for their actions, maybe to some extent. But anyway, the more
Yeah.
interesting thing that I thought that you brought up there was you're right about the mistakes, right? So we do put an outsized focus on the potential mistakes that AI can make compared to the mistakes that human beings make. I mean, we see it with
Yeah.
driverless driving and radiology, and like there's a million examples of AI
Yeah.
outperforming humans in terms of error rate, right? But I think it's because we are prediction machines, right? Like that's how our brain works is we're running multiple prediction models at one time and then we kind of land on which is the best prediction, the most likely prediction. But we've had our whole lives to have experience with human beings. And
Mhm.
so we're better at predicting because we have better priors in the prediction models and there's more data, right? Whereas this AI thing is so new to us that we don't have the data to draw from. And humans we're bad with statistics. I mean, it's
Mhm.
just how it is, right? Like we don't really think statistically. There's always base rate neglect and all these other biases and mistakes that we make. So I think what you're seeing here is a human physiology, a human neurology that has evolved for hundreds of thousands, millions of years without AI,
Yeah.
and we just haven't been able to kind of catch up to the new paradigm.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Um, but and I understand the stress that a lot of folks feel. I I'm not so doom and gloom. I'm not giving into the hyperbole. I think I think the future is very bright. I think it's gonna you talk about we mentioned the word paradigm. The paradigm will shift drastically. It'll shift in the SOC. It will shift in the accounting office. It will shift in the GRC, the governance, risk, and compliance function. But those are good things in my estimation. I saw a thing on Twitter a decade ago when it was called Twitter. Somebody said, look at this picture. You got a bunch of guys sitting around with slide rules and calculators. This room right here is a spreadsheet. I think we're in those times right now with AI.
Yeah, I agree. So let's bring it home. Let's get into some practical advice for people that want to start to operate with this identity is the new edge philosophy. So what are steps 1 and 2 for the technology leaders listening to this?
Yeah. I think recognize, number one, recognize its importance. Understand where it factors into an attacker's mindset. And the answer that we already gave is first, it is the edge. That is your crown jewels. Those are your crown jewels. So accept reality. Let's start there. Number 2, assess your governance program. Does it exist? What does it look like? How do you manage what we call joiners, movers, adders, leavers? Are you doing it in a programmatic way? Have you established the what, the why, the who, policies, the standards, etc.? Next, assess and tackle authentication and authorization. Those are not the same things. As a business leader, as a security leader, separate them out. Authentication, who are you? Authorization, what are you allowed to do? Look at your protocols. Are your protocols for authentication and authorization strong? Are they defensible? Identity management, different from governance. It's a subpart. I don't know. Again, back to those joiners, movers, adders, leavers. User identities, machine identities, and access control. The other thing that always goes mistaken or that goes overlooked is certificate management. Certificate management is huge in identity management and data management. A lot of business leaders overlook certificates. Certificates are how we identify and authorize users and machines. And then maybe the last part would be privileged access management, privileged identity management. Most organizations have rolled out CyberArk. They've rolled out Delinea. They've rolled out the other tools and products that manage those things. But those are really frontline tools now if you accept our premise that identity is the new edge. And I guess the last thing I would throw in there is password managers. You and I talked about it earlier. It is time. We are well past time where you can, as a CIO and as a CISO, you can vouch for it. You can roll out a password manager to your users and it will be successful. And you can rest assured when you're rolling out Okta, for example, you're rolling out Beekeeper, Dashlane, etc., that it will be successful and that you will actually minimize user friction. And that by doing that, you will increase your security outcome.
And then anytime you introduce an intervention, people on video saw my dog just make an appearance again. She does that from time to time.
Talk about a leftover from COVID. I embrace it.
Exactly.
I embrace it.
So anytime you introduce any kind of intervention, there's the potential for unintended consequences. So is there anything that you can, predict that could potentially become a challenge because of this change?
That's more of a CIO question. I will like water go around that boulder.
Sure.
And say, all of these OEMs and all of these solutions allow you a nice, slow ramp up and a demo period, a proof of concept period. My former CEO, Doug King at E+, he's now moved on to another organization and they're lucky to have him. Very, very slowly, methodically, in a time-bound and metric-driven way, rolled out Okta to our organization. It was seamless. It was seamless. Why? Because Doug knew what he was doing. Okta knew what he was doing. Mark Palecchio and all of the other players in that organization knew what they were doing and knew how to sort out those issues during that slow and deliberate rollout. But
So
again, like, go ahead.
the takeaway sounds like focus on change management, and as former guest Gary Sorrentino from Zoom said, human change management.
Yes. Yes. And communicating constantly with your users, especially your admins, because those, they're sitting on all the privileged accounts. They're sitting on all of the secrets management. There's one more element that we didn't mention. If you, the user, accept Brian and Shawn's premise that identity is the new edge, and you accept Sunil Yu's premise that we have entered into the age of recovery, and his architecture, the DIE architecture, distributed, immutable, ephemeral, big fan of it. If you accept all of this, what's the one thing that you have to be doing? You have to be monitoring, and you have to have the ability to respond to user-based attacks. So Shawn, you mentioned training up users, spot phishing, doing user awareness training. We all do that. That's great. But on the flip side, as SOC responders, as people that run a SOC and respond, reporting, monitoring, and response to user-based attacks and incidents is key. It's not shutting a firewall port anymore. It's not closing. It's not isolating the machine. It's responding to the user identity at the identity layer, at the identity governance layer.
Mm, that makes sense. Last question. Aside from what we talked about today, what's something that you wish more CISOs were thinking about or talking about in this space?
Yeah, I think it's true identity governance and minimizing friction, and doing it because we are going to achieve a more secure outcome. And that minimization of friction to the user imposes friction to the attacker, and that gets us where we want to be. But identity governance and also data governance is not a security topic. It's not, but it has whopping and massive security implications. And so CISOs really need to, if they already don't have a seat at the table, which I would find highly unlikely, then they need to push themselves in like a 13-year-old at Thanksgiving who says, doggone, I need to be at the adults table. Been there. I was summarily dismissed from the adults table, but if you're a CISO, yeah, you've got to push your way into that conversation because it is essential.
Well, hopefully you have a seat at the adults table, at least at Thanksgiving.
Doggone it, I've earned it.
All right. Brian Zimmer, thank you so much for your time and expertise.
You're very welcome.